Easily one of the most iconic train levels in a video game was the start of 1998's Half-Life. It served as an introduction to the game world, filled in some of the player's backstory, and provided a look at what challenges lie ahead. But this isn't the only introduction train level in a game of this period. There was another in a little-known game called Gunman Chronicles. Welcome, my name's Xash and welcome to another PC game retrospective video. Half-Life delivered a lot of new things to gamers, but one thing that probably isn't as well remembered in modern times is the ease of development of mods using its in-game engine, technically known as Gold Source. I recall it even including a level builder on the original CD, which for 1998 wasn't just unusual, it was unheard of. Supporting such an open and vibrant modding scene meant that we got a lot of amazing mods, often distributed for free so long as you owned a copy of the original game. But it wasn't just free mods that we got, there were also a variety of other paid titles based on the Gold Source engine, with the first entry being the Half-Life expansion, Opposing Force. But while Opposing Force was firmly based in the Half-Life universe, during the same time period and location no less, Gunman Chronicles, released just 1 year later, featured a completely original plot set in space in the far future. But before we talk about its release, we need to go back a few years to look at its rather curious history. You see, Gunman Chronicles actually started out in 1996 as a Quake mod known as Gunmanship 101. With the release of Quake 2 in late 1997, development then pivoted to the much improved Quake 2 engine before making one final change to the Half-Life engine in 1998. Footage of the game was then shown at the 1999 Half-Life Mod Expo, and it instantly grabbed the attention of publisher Sierra Entertainment, who approached the developers to produce a standalone retail game. Something which, together with some resources from Valve Software, they did and shipped Gunman Chronicles for Windows PCs a year later. Now, we are technically playing that same Windows PC version, although with several new coats of paint. The first edition is Xash3D, an excellent fan-made open-source game engine which effectively modernizes the original Gold Source engine included with the game. This doesn't just allow the game to be run on modern PCs, but it offers the ability for it to be run in widescreen, as well as adding in a lot of back-end refinements. The other edition is the HD Upscale Pack, another fan-made add-on which takes the original low-resolution textures and upscales them using a combination of AI and manual retouching. If you take a look at this comparison, you get a good idea of just how much of an improvement this delivers, and in-game it is equally as impressive. I'll drop a link to both of these mods in the description, and while they do improve the graphical presentation, gameplay, as well as other things like sound and interface, remain faithful to the original release. As far as reception for that original release went, it's an interesting case. On one hand, PC Gamer gave it a 5 out of 10, going as far to say that the whole game feels amateurish. Meanwhile, Eurogamer gave it an 8 out of 10, suggesting it's a worthy addition to someone's single-player FPS collection. And just to round things out, GameSpot gave it a 6 out of 10, but said that it should have been kept as a free download. I think one of the biggest challenges the game faced was that it not only followed up the genre-defining Half-Life, but its first official expansion pack, Opposing Force, which, although I don't think reached the highs of the original Half-Life, was still a very competent and engaging shooter developed by the well-funded Gearbox Software. The box of Gunman Chronicles even mirrored a lot of the design of the Half-Life box, so there was certainly going to be expectations of a similar experience. As far as the setting goes, the game takes place in the far future where mankind has begun to expand beyond their own solar system and colonize other planets. The gunmen, as they are known, serve as somewhat of a space military to protect Earth and these new colonies from whatever threats they may face. There's definitely parallels to things like Starship Troopers here, although the game does do a really good job of creating its own unique world, and for the most part, it's an interesting world that sets the scene for an interesting story. Unfortunately, the story the game tells just isn't as interesting as the world itself. The player assumes control of Major Archer, a senior-ranking member of the Gunman forces, and sees him tasked with investigating the reason for the loss of communication with an outpost. Several lines of exposition later, and we find out that a rogue gunman faction, led by someone known only as the General, is responsible, and that this General has plans to wipe out all of the gunmen in the universe using genetically engineered creatures known as xenomes. There are some bright moments in the story, but these mostly revolve around a secondary plot involving a rogue AI, which is actually far more interesting and engaging than the main one. I mean, take a look at the general here. Apparently he hates the gunmen and everything they stand for, although he's still happy to wear his original gunman uniform. And I know it's his original uniform because there's a projection of him in the tutorial wearing it. Regardless of the nitpicks though, the story is serviceable, but I use that term in the most basic sense, as in it serves to provide a reason to progress through each area, just not a particularly good one. Before we continue, a massive thank you to those who support the channel. If you enjoy this type of content, please consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. With that out of the way, let's smash some pots, shoot some xenomes, and head back to the year 2000 to remember Gunman Chronicles. Upon starting the game, the player is greeted with a very familiar Half-Life camera and control scheme, which for the most part works well for the entire adventure. However, outside of these hallmarks, the game takes on a very different persona to that of Half-Life. One of the most significant changes is in combat, specifically the weapons system. Now, gone is the more traditional weapon wheel or scroll bar from other shooters at the time, instead replaced with a kind of hybrid weapon selection and settings bar. Let me explain. The game's first weapon is the laser pistol. You can use either a hotkey or the mouse wheel to select it. By default, it is set to pulse mode, which is basically a burst fire mode, useful for slow-moving targets, but not effective on fast-moving or ranged targets. Which is fine because the weapon has several other modes you can switch to, such as charge, rapid, or sniper. However, to switch modes, you need to use the right mouse button, then the scroll wheel to select which mode, and then finally the left mouse button to confirm. I was actually so confused by the tutorial that explained this that I had to go into the settings to confirm exactly which button did what, a sure sign that this system would cause trouble in the future, which it did. Early on in the adventure, the system works fine because you are often in wide open spaces with sparse low-level enemies, and all the time in the world to make these weapon changes. However, as early as the second half of the first level, this system begins to unravel as you face tougher enemies in greater numbers, as well as tighter level geometry, which compounds this problem even further. I could possibly live with this system if it were just tied to the pistol, only it's not. It's included on virtually every weapon. Take the shotgun, for example. It has 3 modes: shotgun, rifle, and riot gun, each with a different utility, as well as the ability to set how many shells are fired. Now, maybe there's an argument to be made here for giving the player total control, but I would just prefer the game give you either a shotgun with a primary and secondary fire, or a separate weapon for each function. Oh, and the shotgun kicks you back slightly when you fire it. Remember this, it will be important later. In most shooters, the weapon selection system is centered to the screen. This is so that the player can maintain an awareness of the environment while switching weapons. It started in Doom and has featured in just about every shooter since. However, in Gunman Chronicles, the weapon selection is located in the top right of the screen, with the sub-menu for each mode shifting to the top center. This doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you take the already inherent complexities in this system and then add a requirement to dart your eyes around different parts of the HUD to use it, it doesn't equal a great experience for the player. These vast changes from a traditional weapon system have a large impact on the overall cohesion of the game's combat. For example, after a short while of changing weapon settings around, I just decided to ignore what weapon was the best for each scenario and just push through most areas tanking damage with whatever weapon I had equipped until I needed to switch for ammo reasons. Oh, and to highlight just how inconsistent the overall weapon system is, this is me engaging a chopper about 70 to 80 meters in the sky with a shotgun. It takes 3 or 4 shots, probably 3 as it's actually starting to fall before I shoot the last, but let's be safe and say 4. Now here's me engaging one of the first human enemies you find in the game from about 10 meters, and that's 4 shots also. Right, so a human enemy is as tough as a helicopter, got it. Another thing which stacks on the already challenging combat system is the enemy design. To be fair, there are some highlights here, including some well thought out bosses, and the human enemies are fairly consistent. However, there are several enemies which move very quickly and then jump at you. I'd be okay with this if it was used sparingly, but honestly, it's far overused and highlights another problem which comes up often in enemy placement. There's just too many times the game expects the player to tank damage due to rounding a corner to a projectile shooting or jumping enemy. And while I wouldn't say the game is overly difficult, these occasions make the combat feel cheap. Although one part of the combat that is well executed is the tank. Everything from the tank's weapons to the concept of needing to refuel it as you progress through the level is all well done, as is the fact that they actually put a drivable tank in the game, something that as far as I'm aware didn't exist in any other Half-Life expansion or mod. I only wish the tank stages were more frequent, as this would have gone a long way to break things up between some of the more troublesome combat. One area I have to give praise to is the environment and level design. Discounting the upscaled textures, what is here from a level design perspective is really good. Every location feels unique, and the amount of scripted events on display is impressive. There's also quite good attention to detail here. For example, running into a cactus hurts you. Although the player somehow survives this fall with no damage whatsoever. In fact, they wake up 3 hours later with more health than they went down with. Must have landed in just the right way. There are some areas of the level design which I would say lack polish. Like take for example this section which includes a ladder. There's actually 2 ladders here. Why? Well, because when descending a ladder with nothing in front of you, you tend to have a 50% chance of just falling off the platform. To be fair, this is a gold source game engine issue and not necessarily one inherent to Gunman. However, conventional wisdom would say to design another way down, such as an elevator, but instead they've just added another ladder, which architecturally doesn't make a lick of sense, but alas, it gets the job done. The other area of level design which could be contentious is the cryptic nature of progression. Take a look at this short clip and see if you can find out where you need to go to progress. If you guessed here, well done. If not, you were probably like me and wandered around this area for another 10 minutes before eventually finding it. Now, one thing I will cop to is my complete lack of awareness of what a medical recharge station looks like. In my defense, in the tutorial, the game shows you these machines and says, watch out for them because you can recharge your health at them. Great. After getting about halfway through the game, I thought, wow, I haven't seen one medical recharge station at all. I must just be missing them. But I keep walking past these strange panels with red crosses on them. Oh, right. They're the recharge stations. As I said, Gunman Chronicles isn't exactly the most challenging game, and health is available from pickups also, so it didn't turn out to be a big issue, although there were certainly a few times when the use of these stations would have helped out. Overall, the ambition behind the gameplay is undeniable, and it pays dividends in the environment and level design well. This is an interesting world to explore. It's just a shame that combat is challenging for all the wrong reasons. I mean, creating the weapon system the game uses would have been substantially more effort than just carrying over the Half-Life weapon system. But the issue is, I think the game would have been better off keeping that original system, or at least a derivative of it. One of the benefits of using an established game engine for development is that a lot of the subsystems of presentation, such as menu and interface, are already in place, just requiring some customization. In this regard, the presentation is solid, with no noticeable performance or stability issues, although I did encounter a strange case where I managed to get stuck in the floor. I tried walking, jumping, crouching, nothing would allow me to move and get myself unstuck. And then I remembered that the shotgun pushes you back when you fire. I wonder if... Yeah, it worked and helped get me unstuck. Thank you, questionable design decision. Oh, and I did manage to find an enemy which seemed to be impervious to all types of damage, although thankfully he couldn't return fire either. Now, these are both minor issues, especially for the time period, and the only real criticism I can level at the presentation is the staggering overuse of the screen shake mechanic. When I say it's overused, I'm being generous. It's so prevalent in one section of the game that I wouldn't recommend anyone who suffers from motion sickness play it. Yes, there is context within the level as to why the screen's shaking, but as the player, only 1 or 2 of these shakes was needed to tell the story, not a seemingly unending amount to constantly remind you of the current situation. Now, after listening to me talk about the gameplay, you might think that my single biggest issue with Gunman Chronicles is the gameplay, but it's actually not. It's the sound. By a big margin. It's not because of the music, not because of the voice acting, not even because of the mixing. These are all fine. It's because of some of the enemy sounds. They are like an assault on your ears, and combined with the fact that many of these enemies are often in large groups, these sounds often overlap. But don't take my word for it, take a listen for yourself, and do note I have manually decreased the volume substantially for this part of the video. Gunman Chronicles is a good representation of the fact that effort spent in developing a video game does not necessarily equal the creation of a good video game. And it's very obvious that a lot of effort was put into this game. If this were a free mod, as many similar experiences of the time were, then I'd be praising this effort while highlighting what I think could have been improved. But this isn't a free mod. It's a paid standalone title, and with that compensation for the developers comes an expectation of a standard of quality, and that standard is not always met. There are highlights within the game, and it's certainly not going to be appearing on any worst of lists, but Gunman just doesn't deliver a polished enough experience consistently to be remembered as anything other than a Half-Life mod. I get the idea that if Sierra and by extension Valve had provided more resources to the original development team, we would have ended up with a very different game. I don't know if there is a case to be made for a remake of this particular game, but the concept of the game is certainly one I think that could be explored again. Whether or not we'll ever see that, though, is anyone's guess. But that's enough from me. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.